not a problem.
But you look Scottish.
Do I? Okay. Well, my dad was a Scotsman, so that's probably where I got that from, for sure.
Okay.
But yes, as an Englishman and a big cricket fan, there are two teams that I support. One is England, and anybody that plays Australia.
Okay.
but I don't say that normally.
But my favorite team was always the Australians, and of course, other than India. But the days of Lilly and Thompson, and very nostalgic.
Yeah, that's right. And we have actually our representative for the Australia-India Business Council here in Western Australia is Adam Gilchrist.
Wow. Okay.
So he is our ambassador. Obviously, Adam Gilchrist, wicketkeeper for Australia, and so on. So he's somebody that is very prominently involved in our organisation. So that's very They certainly were. That was certainly an excellent period of cricket. The 90s and so on, and a little bit beyond that for the Australians when they had some serious a serious team, world beaters.
World beaters. But actually, I think, Steve, maybe a little before your time, but Lilly bowling at Perth was something, because Perth those days was a very quick pitch and extremely bouncy.
Yes.
So I remember
that's right.
I remember a time when I think Thompson bowled a bouncer which went over Marsh's head almost for a 6.
That's right. Well, we still have the ground, of course, here, the Wacker. But now international cricket is now played here in Perth in our new stadium.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a new 60,000 seater stadium here, so the Wacker is not anymore used for international cricket because it is also, it's a bit of a furnace. It's largely uncovered, the Wacker, and the Western Australian summer can be very hot. So sitting out in 40 degrees of heat, which is not necessarily a pleasant experience at the Wacker. They call it the furnace.
Furnace. Oh, okay. So I see that you have a deep interest in cricket as well.
I do. Yes, I do. I was brought up actually with in the era of Ian Botham. So that was very much he's one of my heroes, obviously, from a cricketing perspective. I'm an avid follower of cricket for sure, and I'm glad that we've got some going on at the moment in England. At least we can watch it on the TV. With the Pakistan series, which is very interesting. Pakistan have some excellent bowlers at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Pakistan have always struggled with their batsmen a little bit.
Yes, that's right.
So Pakistan got away with it when they had their own umpires, but now with neutral umpires, it's becoming a little difficult. So I say that tongue in cheek, yeah.
Yes, you do. Yes, you say it as a good Indian cricket supporter. That's right. I'm keeping out of that one. I have enough with England and Australia without getting involved in India-Pakistan cricket.
Great. So, by the way, before we kick off, I just want to tell you that I played some serious cricket myself. So, I played junior cricket for my state, and didn't make it to the senior teams, but that was good. Yeah, I enjoyed cricket.
So what were you? Were you a batsman, Nakaraj, or were you an all-rounder?
I was one drop. I was the main batting stay of my team.
Oh, okay. So what, number 3?
Number three, yeah.
Yes, yes. The iconic position.
The iconic position held by, India, Rahul Dravids and...
yes, indeed.
I think Greg Chappell or... England, I'm not sure who was the great number 3. Maybe David Gower, maybe.
David Gower, certainly. And then probably later on when we had, during that period recently, we had Strauss Cook, and then
Strauss.
Bell, and so on. That was definitely good. But of course, Australia have had some great number threes, Ricky Ponting and so on. But yeah, excellent. It's a key position.
Yeah, actually, for a brief time when Gawa, Gatting, and so on were around, England had a very strong team.
Yes,
I think the only problem was that the West Indies were around and they were stronger at that point in time.
yes, that's right. Yeah, I
So
mean, yeah, just to walk out and face those bowlers. The problem is you couldn't get away from it because they had four and they were all fast.
absolutely, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I think let's
Okay.
get started. Yeah, you were asking me something, and then
No, that's fine. Let's go.
yeah. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Distinguished Speaker Series brought to you by Dayanand Sagar University, Bengaluru. Today, we are joined by Dr. Steve McKenna from Perth, Australia. Thank you for making time for us, Steve. I'm particularly pleased with the Australian part as I grew up watching Lillian Thompson decimate opposition batsmen from 22 yards. The nostalgia is brilliant. Also, Steve is the first speaker joining us from Australia on the Distinguished Speaker Series. Dr. Steve McKenna is an associate professor of management at Curtin Business School. He has worked in Asia, North America, and Europe in corporate and entrepreneurial startups and academia. His research interests include global mobility and networks, human resource management and ethics, agile human resource management, the employee experience and talent management, and family businesses. He has published on these topics in leading academic journals. He is a member of the management committee of the Australia India Business Council, Western Australia. Today, he's going to speak to us on the future of human resource management. Human resource management has, in many parts of the world, played a huge part in helping organizations adjust and adapt during the COVID 19 pandemic. It has been seen as crucial in managing rapid work changes. The future will see HRM change in many ways. In this lecture, the issues relating to the future of HRM and its role will be considered, including the high level role of HRM, the influence of technology and analytics, and the skills HR professionals will need in the future. So before I hand over to Dr. McKenna, I would request my colleague, Dr. Rahul Gige, to pitch in and just take us through over the next 15 to 20 seconds of how this webinar is going to work. Rahul, can you come in, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Captain. So welcome to all of you once again. As we have done in the previous webinars, we will take questions, any questions that you have in the Zoom chat window. All participants will be on mute, except the speaker, Captain, and myself. And please post your questions there. And as before, as we have done before, at the end of the talk, I will ask those questions to our speaker, Dr. Steve McKenna. And also at the end, there will be a closure done by Captain. So thank you. And Steve, over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Raoul. And thank you very much also, Professor Captain Naharaj, for that introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight. Welcome, everybody. I see there are quite a few participants here, which is excellent. And I'm very pleased to be here and grateful to be here talking to you this evening about the future of people management, or the future of human resources management. As Professor Naharaj said, he can certainly remember Lillian Thompson bowling quick balls. As he said earlier on, very quick balls actually at the English. And as I indicated to Captain Professor Naharaj, I'm actually, although in Australia, I am a born Englishman. So as I said to him, there are two teams at cricket that I support. One is England, and the second is anybody that plays Australia. So for all you cricket lovers there, I'm sure you'll appreciate that particular comment. So as Professor Naharaj said, one of the things that's occurred as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic is that where it seems wherever we look in the world, and at the moment I'm involved in a 7-country project, which is looking at the impact on human resource management of the COVID-19 pandemic. And certainly in all of the countries involved in that project, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, the UK, Indonesia, and also in UAE in the Middle East. Wherever we look, the impact that HR has had in managing this the COVID-19 pandemic and the changes that organizations have had to make has been considerable. And a large part of that, of course, is to do with the fact that one of the most important things that has occurred as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic has been the need for people to move from their offices and obviously to work at home. And because we're dealing with work and employment and working practices, the role of HR in helping businesses continue as a consequence of the pandemic has been huge. So one of the things that we've learned over the course of the last few months with respect to human resources management is how vital human resource management expertise is in actually managing business continuity. And without, in fact, the expertise of HR in many organizations, business continuity and the move to remote working and so on wouldn't have been as seamless as it appears to have been in many countries around the world. So the role of HR, I think, has in organizations has certainly been given a huge boost under the very difficult circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what I want to do here is not talk specifically about that, but look at the kinds of things that appear to be happening in human resources management, which when we look to the future, give us an indication of how this particular function in organizations may in fact be changing. And so let's start here with a little bit of a historical background. When we think about human resources management or people management in a kind of more sort of theoretical sense or in a historical sense, one of the things that I think has been important in human resources management is that it's always been continuously reinvented. So depending on where we are in the world, human resources in many countries started off really as the welfare department, particularly in industrial, commercial organizations. Then it moved to being more of a broader personnel administration role, became personnel management. The name changed again to human resources management. And now one of the things we find in many organizations, in many countries, the HR department is now perhaps called the human capital management department or the people, culture and organizations part of an organization. So one of the things we would hope that these name changes indicate is a changing role to some extent for HR. And I think in some ways what's happened over the course of a period of 60, 70 or 80 years is that HR has kind of picked up more and more of the aspects of people management in organizations. So from being a purely welfare department, perhaps in the very beginning, it's moving now into all sorts of areas of an organization, and particularly, of course, in relation to being perhaps a business partner and a strategic partner for senior leaders in organizations. One of the problems, though, with all of the additional elements over the years that HR has accumulated is that it's led to some extent to some confusing roles, which is what I'm trying to point out here in the bottom of this particular slide. So when we look at the names of HR people in organizations, sometimes they're called administrators or advisors or consultants or integrators or business partners and so on. But what is key, I think, and going to be key for human resources management departments and professionals in the future is that they have to become what are now called value creators. And the key question for HR in the future in organizations, not all organizations necessarily, but certainly organizations that are in the third sector or the service sector, is how can HR think about its role much more such that it creates value for the organization. So HR as value creators is a very key concept, I think, that many organizations now are beginning to think about. And what exactly does that mean in practice? So let's have a move back a step in some ways and look at the future of work. What are the forces that are shaping the future of work? So on this slide, which is taken from the World Economic Forum, the WEF suggests to us that there are 6 major forces that are shaping the future of work in a globalized business context. And if we look at this slide here at the top, the first force that they argue is that shaping the future of work is the disruption of tasks. And what that essentially means is that the world of work and the world of how work is done is being very much disrupted. And of course, we probably all realize that one of the key disruptors of work in the modern period is, of course, technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. So one of the things that we're, I'm sure, very much aware of is that what is happening now and what will happen in the future is that much of the work that is done in the world is being disrupted, and it's being disrupted through artificial intelligence and through machine learning and through technology more generally. So work in the future is very much being shaped by the use of technology, and that technology impact has also had an effect, of course, on HR and the role of HR professionals. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. In relation to that also, of course, the future of work and the forces that are shaping the future of work will also be the skills that are required. So if tasks, jobs, roles that have to be done are being disrupted by technology, it clearly means that the skills that are going to be required in the future are going to be very different from the skills that are required now or that have been required in the past. And the general sort of argument is that a young person now going off to university to do their first degree, by the time they complete their degree, a large portion of the jobs that existed when they started their degree will not be in existence when they finish. And there were many jobs that weren't in existence when they started their degree that 4 years later have now become jobs that are available to them. So this means, of course, that from a work perspective and from a human resources perspective, because tasks, jobs are being disrupted through technology and the skills therefore are going to be very different in the future, this means that from the point of view of an individual, the need for constant upskilling and being aware of what's going on is clearly very, very important. The third force shaping the future of work are new business models. So the World Economic Forum makes the point that I'm sure we all know about, which is, of course, technology also facilitates the creation and startup of businesses that can become global businesses overnight because of the availability of technology, because of the internet, and so on and so forth. So the old traditional business models that some of us, certainly me, were brought up knowing about are being completely disrupted because of the speed and agility with which new businesses can be created and the extent to which those businesses can almost instantly become global businesses overnight. So the future of work is also going to be shaped by these new business models and how new businesses operate in the very fast changing new world in which we live, which probably is going to be accelerated much more, of course, because of the influence of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also, as a force shaping the future of work, need to be aware of distributed workforces. And this, of course, part of this is the remote working. People are working together at great lengths, geographically different. And not only that now, but of course, remote working means that workforces are very distributed throughout economies. And we would expect to find, in fact, that whereas a lot of people in the past would go into the office, obviously to work, increasingly now we find that it's perfectly acceptable, and will become more acceptable, that people will actually be able to do their work from home as well, and perhaps more productively than they did previously in their office situation. Another force shaping the future of work is the changing demographics. In some countries, of course, we have aging populations. In other countries, we have a huge and young population. So with changing demographics, we also see that the expectations of people in society will change. What they want from work will certainly change, and this will be an important force that will have an impact on how work is done, where work is done, and what people want from their work in the future. So in a general sense, these forces that are shaping the future of work are clearly going to be very important. And at a micro level, at a local level, these kinds of forces will have a huge impact on how people are managed, and therefore the role of human resources management in all kinds of industries and all kinds of sectors in the future. So, as the world of work changes, a key question for us is, what is the place for human resources management? And one of the things that we should know about HR is that HR is a very local activity in a business. The way in which we put in place our human resource management systems and processes will not only be related to the kind of organization we are, the kind of business we are, but also, of course, the broader context in which we operate. So human resource management in India and various parts of India, different businesses in India will be very specific to that context in the way they are here in Australia. So we should always be aware of the fact that human resources management, the idea of universal best practices in HR, is not something necessarily that's very helpful. Human resources management is always very contextualized in relation to a whole range of contextual factors that are important, including sector, industry, size of a business, and of course institutional, country, environment and context. So what can we say about the trends in HR, and how might in the future human resources need to reinvent itself to prepare itself in the future, and what skills will HR professionals need? And I think that is an important question, which I'll come back to in a few minutes with another slide. So let's have a look. One of the things that a team of us have been doing recently here in Western Australia is looking at the variety of professional associations, human resource management professional associations around the world, to see what they've been saying about what are the key elements of HR in the future. What are the essential things that HR needs to be aware of in order to create value for an organization? So the first of those, let's start here, is to develop an external focus and not just be internally focused. So when we look at the way in which HR is moving in many countries, particularly many Western countries, HR is actually not only internally focused on what it can do within organizations, it's very much now concerned with the relationship between a business and its external stakeholders and its external environment. So, for example, some investors in businesses now will be looking very much at the kinds of people that are recruited into an organization, will be concerned about the values that drive a business, the commitment that a business might have to broad issues like sustainability and so on. And so HR is very important, not only internally, but stakeholders and investors who look at businesses will be looking at the extent to which a business is taking an ethical and a sustainable approach to the recruitment of people for an organization, right? So HR internally in organizations has to also be concerned with how it promotes itself externally. What is it saying to the marketplace? What is it saying to potential investors about the kind of people it recruits and the kind of values and so on that exist within an organization? Secondly, an issue that we probably already know about is that HR has to be strategically relevant for the business that it's in. So it's the old adage that's often referred to as anybody in HR needs to be a business person first and an HR person second. So a key issue in terms of future skills for HR professionals is that they must know the business that they are in order to create value for that business. It's still in some ways perhaps an issue where a lot of younger people who go to university to study perhaps a degree in human resources management, they remain unaware of the relationship between HR and the business. And in order to be an effective HR person, it's absolutely crucial that HR professionals, HR managers, and so on know intimately the business that they are in. So they have to know marketing, they have to know how to read a balance sheet and so on at the minimum in order to make a contribution to an organization. The third issue that I think is going to be important in the future for HR professionals is that they have to be more than people who produce policies and procedures and programs. They have to be able to create more value for an organization beyond just producing policies and procedures. So they have to know the strengths that an organization needs in its people that assist in driving organizational performance and realizing organizational strategies. So HR people have to be value creators, not just policy formulators. And this is a very different role in some ways than HR people see the role of HR, I think, in organizations. It's not about policies, it's about creating value. Fourthly, one of the real problems in many organizations that if we look at many consulting reports will tell us the same thing much of the time about what leaders say about leadership generally, is that there aren't enough people who are able to take on leadership positions in the future. And one of the reasons for this, many professional associations think, is that management and leadership development is unfortunately outdated, and that we need new approaches to the way in which managers and leaders are developed, which has to be related to what a business does rather than to some abstract ideas about what leadership is and so on. So leadership is something that happens in reality, not in the abstract. And so when we look at some of the best organizations in the world in relation to what they're doing in leadership and management development, we see that leadership and leaders and managers are developed very much in the business itself, working on real problems that business has, rather than doing some abstract courses and so on external to their organization. The fifth issue that seems to be prominent for the future of HR is to recognize that talent is not limited, talent is everywhere. Again, one of the things I'm sure you're very familiar with is that the idea that talent is scarce, the war for talent. But the problem is, in some ways, talent isn't scarce. You know, there are 7.5 billion people on the planet. I know from my own travels, often around India, that the talent that is available throughout India is huge. So talent is not something that's scarce. And what organizations often need to do is, instead of saying that we need to identify talent, we need to identify the strengths that people in our organization already have and leverage those for the benefit of the organization. So one of the things that a lot of professional associations now are talking about is how can we move away from the idea that there is a limited number of people who have talent to the idea that everybody has talent, and what is important is trying to get that talent to emerge from everybody in an organization. And finally, HR needs to be more about speed and agility and less about compliance. One of the things that is often said about HR is that it moves too slowly and that it puts up too many barriers to an organization actually being quick and effective. And if people see somebody from the HR department coming around to their offices or coming to their place of work, instead of feeling that this is something where they can have a good conversation about things that can be done, people actually are usually fearful of the fact that HR seems to be appearing and there must be problems, rather than the fact that HR is there really to and should be there to assist. So one of the things that is occurring, particularly around the area of agile HRM, is how can we make human resource management much more agile, much quicker at making decisions, reducing barriers that actually help a business, enable a business to create value in various parts of its operations, rather than to put up more barriers, more systems of compliance that actually somehow restrict people from doing what they could be doing to add value. More specifically, one of the key issues that's now developing, and certainly in big companies out of the United States, IBM, Google, and so on, and I'm sure you'll be very much aware of this, is what is driving a lot of the ways in which we want to try and get our people to be more productive is to focus on something that's called the employee experience. Now, when any of us go to our workplaces, in theory and in practice, there are three areas where we experience our work. One is the working experience. This is actually the job that we are there to do, the tools that we have to do that job. So when we think about our working experience at work, a question to ask ourselves is, do I have a good experience of doing my job when I'm in my workplace? Do I have the tools that I need? Do I have the appropriate work design? Do I have parameters around the work that I'm supposed to be doing that are clear, and so on and so forth? If we don't, if we have issues with understanding what it is we're supposed to do, what our objectives might be, and so on, we're likely to have a negative work experience, and that is likely to have an impact on our performance. Secondly, many people go to work, obviously, but also the social experience of work is very important for many of us. So this opportunity to meet other people, to chat with them, not only about work, but about other things in our life. So the social experience of work is also very important. The extent to which our social relationships at work are positive and so on is also likely to enhance our commitment to an organization and our performance. And the third area is the physical or the spatial experience, the actual place that we actually go to do our work. Whatever it is, whether it's some sort of site, whether it's an office or so on, what is our experience of working in that particular location and that space, that physical environment? Is it positive or negative? All of those three types of experience that we have at work make up our employee experience. And here at Curtin Business School, we have an international research institute called the Future of Work Institute. And they have a little model, which you can see at the bottom here, which is called the SMART model. Work should be stimulating. We should have mastery of it. We should be able to do it. We should have some freedom to do it in the way that we want to do it. We should also have pretty good relationships. So work is relational. We have to work with other people as well as get on with them in the workplace. And finally, tolerable demands. It has to be work that may push us and challenge us, but it doesn't push us over the edge in the way that it becomes too stressful and too pressurized. So one of the things that many organizations are now thinking about is how can we enhance the employee experience in such a way that people feel in every interaction they have in work, with the environment, with the work itself, and with other people, are positive experiences. And if we can create that kind of environment, and we know, of course, typically organizations that, like Google and some of the other organizations that are kind of iconic in this way, they create this kind of atmosphere such that the level of commitment and performance of their employees is enhanced because their employee experience is enhanced. All right, and here what we've got is just a little map. When we talk about the employee experience, we're essentially talking about an employee journey map. So if we to look at anybody who joins an organization through onboarding, doing the job, and so on, what we want to be able to do, as far as possible, is to be able to measure the quality of the experience that a person is having, and then we can map that onto a dashboard such as this, so that we have a good understanding of the extent of the positivity of the employee experience in our organization. Another big issue, of course, that I've already mentioned, I'm just returning to it now, of course, is the impact of technology on human resources management. Many people don't understand or don't realize how impactful technology has been already in the area of human resources management. Artificial intelligence, for example. So if you just Google IBM Watson Career Coach, one of the things you will find is that there is now a career coach developed by IBM and Watson, which is basically something that you carry around on your phone. So you have your kind of coach in your pocket. You can ask it questions about aspects of your career. Everything you ask and the answers you get will build up the data that is available on that app about you, so that you will basically be having a conversation with a coach who carries around with them in your phone, of course, in an app, details about your career, where you are in your career, the things you've done, your ambitions, and so on. So everybody can have a personalized coach, which of course is in this form inexpensive. We know that technology is now very prominent in the recruitment process. Many companies will use algorithms to be able to understand or be able to separate people through the application process based on perhaps words that they use in their application letters and so on, to be able to shortlist or at least long list people without human intervention. And we know that many organizations for many relatively lower level positions are using technology to sift through applicants for a particular role before there is a human intervention in that process. Many organizations, chatbots are the new HR managers. So we now find in organizations, as an employee, if you've got a question about your some HR question, you will often chat to a robot, a chatbot, who will be able to give you some of those basic routine answers that in the past would be given by a human being. But now, of course, the chatbot can perfectly easily answer. They estimate about 85% of the questions that most people have in their organizations regarding human resource management issues. So that might be simple issues about how much leave do you have left, when is your next salary increase, and so on. So chatbots deal with a huge proportion of some of the basic questions that people would have in HR, and now many major organizations would use these as a matter of course. We also know that virtual reality and augmented reality is having a huge impact on things like onboarding people into organizations. It's now being used also in cross-cultural training to prepare people who may be moving overseas on an international assignment. They might be moving from Perth, perhaps to Bangalore, and virtual reality enables a person before they leave to actually be in a situation in Bangalore, in the office in Bangalore, so that they can prepare themselves in a much more meaningful way from that move than perhaps they could in the past, where of course they had no ability in virtual reality to actually go to a place that they were moving to. So this is a really exciting development in the area of things like cross-cultural preparation, preparation for international assignments and so on. We also know that wearable technology, Amazon is a classic example of a company where the workforce are very closely monitored through the use of wearable technology in terms of time it takes to move parcels from one place to another and so on. So wearable technology and certainly also technology that is sometimes put into computers to monitor the work of employees. There are sort of ethical issues related to some of those kinds of technologies, but they're certainly very prominently used in organizations to measure and collect data on how employees are working. Data analytics, of course, machine learning in HR is already very huge. One very clear example, in the past, of course, one of the things that organizations used to be very concerned about was the turnover rate, measuring turnover, how many people over the course of a year leaving our organization, and so on. But we're moving, of course, now from that kind of analytic to predictive analytics. And organizations now want to know not who's leaving, but who might leave in the future. So by collecting data on our workforce and more data by constant feedback mechanisms, for example, there was a mining company here in Western Australia called Rio Tinto that asks all of its employees every week to fill in a 10-question feedback sheet about work that week. How did they feel about work that week? Did they have any problems? What kind of problems did they have? And all of this, of course, is data collection. And on the basis of those kinds of collection of data, companies can begin to predict the kind of people that might in the future leave the organization. And if we can understand that, and we don't want those people to leave, then of course an organization is in a much better position to do something about preventing the turnover of people that they do not want to leave. So measuring turnover as a feature of the past, now with the benefit of technology, machine learning and so on, we can get to a point where we can actually predict the people who may leave in the future, and as a consequence of that we can do something about that rather than simply before it happens, rather than trying to do something after it has occurred. So technology allows us to get constant feedback, to build up a data set. It allows us to personalize HR so that we can develop what are called personas, that different people from different generations in organizations will have different wants or needs from an organization. We can understand that better. We can get a good sense of what people are thinking and feeling about work through sentiment analysis and so on. So many things that we would be interested in as a business owner or as a business about our employees in terms of how they're feeling and thinking and so on. We can collect more and more data, and as a consequence of gathering that data, we can move from simply measuring what has happened to predicting what might happen in the future, and of course trying to do something about that. And what we would see in some organizations, of course, is that every individual would have their own individual dashboard that maybe looks something like this. So where everything that is important to them in their working life is actually captured on a dashboard, which can be updated both between HR and the individual whose dashboard it is, so that we all have a very clear representation of things like what our goals are, how our team are performing, and so on. All right, so another 2 slides, and then I think I'm in a position to finish. What can we say about the skill sets that might be required for HR professionals in the future? Well, the first point is that routine HR jobs are disappearing, and they're actually already disappearing. So because of chatbots and so on, many of the low-level functional roles in HR are disappearing in many developed economies because they can be quite easily done through technology. An HR professional in the future, as in the past, must understand the business that they are in and how human resources management can create value rather than create more policies. How can we contribute to the creation of business value is a key issue. HR professionals in the future need to be design thinkers. They need to be able to envision the future of work and focus on the employee experience. So a key issue for an HR person in the future is to be able to think about how work is changing, because it's going to be changing a lot. It's going to be changing all of the time. And these will have an impact on how HR has to think about working practices, the design of work, and so on. An HR professional in the future needs to understand technology in an HR context. How is HR affected by technology, and how can we use technology to make better HR decisions? And clearly the whole issue of data analytics is very important in that particular context. HR people will, like anybody else, need to continually upskill. They need to understand, the future of work. They need to understand the future of business and how business is changing. HR people need to understand, of course, their local context and the mindset of business leaders. And so, again, going back to the point I made earlier, HR is a very localized activity. And to be a good HR person, of course, you need to understand very much that context that you're in and the leaders for whom you might actually be working. In the future, HR is likely to co-create with managers and other employees the policies and so on that an organization has in order to be more agile. One of the movements that seem to be occurring in HR is that instead of now imposing policies and practices, they're working much more closely with managers in the line of a business and also other employees to create programs and policies which are much more relevant to people in the organization. And this is how they become, of course, much more contextualized and much more relevant to the business. Change management skills are going to be a key aspect of an HR professional's role, and so they'll need to have and understand those change management skills. They'll need to understand the broader governance structures of organizations, how they can influence ethical corporate responsibility initiatives. They need to be aware of digital tools to enhance the employee experience. So chatbots, for example, are a very good example of how the employee experience is enhanced through technology. By simply typing in your question to a chatbot and getting an instant answer, that's usually much better experience for most employees than having to try to contact a human being to answer a relatively simple question. HR people have to be futurists. We have to understand what is the workforce going to be looking like in our organization, in our business in the future. They need to also think about how can we disrupt conventional HR systems to be more agile, to create more value for an organization. And again, going back to the final point, they need to be able to create a total employee experience and to try to co-create with employees what are the best programs and policies that a business should have. Okay, thanks very much. I'll leave it there. There's much more I could say in detail, and hopefully we've got time for a few questions. But for those of you who are interested in just connecting with me on LinkedIn, please just put Steve McKenna and you'll find me there. That's my LinkedIn address, and that's my email at Curtin there at the bottom for your information. Once again, thanks very much for sticking around this evening, and I hope you've got some questions.
Yes, Steve. So thank you so much for that wonderful talk and a perspective on the future of HR. So there are a few questions which, of course, are relevant to maybe relevant and pertinent to the current times and what the current times have brought in terms of the way we work, that is working from home. And what do you think is the role of HRM and HR personnel in the current circumstances? And of course, assuming that maybe some of it will stay the work from home patterns and some of the patterns may actually reverse back. So what will be the role? What's the role for HR today and maybe like about a year down the road?
Thanks, Naharaj. I think that there are kind of, in terms of the remote working issue, it's sort of interesting. One of the key features, I think, of remote working, particularly if it's not something that organizations have done in the past, is that one of the things that we've found, and I think that one of the things when we speak here in Western Australia and around the world to HR professionals and managers, is one of the key issues that they've found is the issue of trust. That once staff move from the workplace to the home, one of the issues that many managers have is this idea that, well, if they're going to be working from home, they can't possibly be working as much as they would if they were in the office and I was there watching them. So one of the things that we found that HR has been very good at doing is to build trust amongst managers who are having now to manage remote workers, remote employees, rather than employees that are in the workplace. And HR has been very key at developing and working with managers to try to create much more of a trusting relationship. I think also HR is going to have to look and is looking at how do we actually manage and how do we measure performance of people who are remote working. And we expect that what's going to happen is that performance is going to be measured much more by outputs rather than more sort of subjective aspects based on visibility. So we have to be very clear about what the outputs and outcomes objectives are that people have when they're remote working. And we have to also understand that it might be the case in the future that people do their training, learning and development much more online than they may have done in the past, where they are actually, instead of going into a physical environment to do corporate training or corporate development, much of that now is probably going to be moving and shifting to much more of an online learning kind of activity. And I think also the way in which we manage people's careers will also change, because people who may be, again, spending much more time in a remote working environment, one of the key issues that people see as important in career development and career progression is to be visible. That their boss sees them and that they engage in the social element of work. So, a lot of people seem to have some problems and concerns about how is a more remote working kind of situation going to affect my career under circumstances where in the past, building a relationship with your manager and boss has been very important, perhaps in offering you, promotion and other kinds of opportunities. I think in a year's time, my guess would be that, I think here in Western Australia, people are already moving back into the office. Some kinds of businesses and industries require that. I think that there will be a great number of people still remote working in a year's time. The balance would move back a little bit, of course, from the height of the the pandemic situation. I think in the future, HR will now be able to acquire a much more prominent position in organizations because it has proven itself, I think, to be very valuable during the pandemic. And I'm hoping that what happens now is that HR people will start to have a little bit more self-confidence in appreciating how important they are in organizations and be very assertive in ensuring that they maintain a seat at the top table of organizations.
Great. So yeah, I think I personally also feel that there will be a blend maybe going forward, and relating to my experience, I remember a few years back when I had remote working employees and also employees working out of an office. It was actually quite difficult uh, to give the perspective of what is happening in the company for people working remotely. So I think for a company, maybe it would make sense to have either remote or in office, but some employees just working from home, I think is not a great idea for their careers, isn't it? So,
No.
another thing that seems to be happening is in India, maybe more so. There is a tendency from large corporations to actually recruit employees through HR agencies, and it's part of the gig economy. And how does HR play a role when you have a large workforce that's actually coming into your company for a gig?
Yeah, that's a good question, Naharaj. I think one of the things that seems to be happening in the places I'm familiar with is that HR tends to be moving a little bit more away from being involved in some of the recruitment and hiring activity. And that is partly, I think, a reflection of course, the increasing amount of people that are working in the so-called kind of gig economy, the short-term contractors and so on. And so I think what appears to be happening is much of that work tends to be now, I think, increasingly outsourced to agents, recruiters, and so on, which is a big industry here in Australia, as I'm probably sure it is in India there. And that also is part of that shift, I think, in the skill set that HR professionals are moving away from what can be seen sometimes as a relatively routine aspect of HR to much more of a kind of strategic partner within an organization that is focused much more on dealing with people once they're in the organization rather than in the recruitment process.
Right. So how will another thing is related to that is how will companies continue to develop their employees in the new normal, and is learning and development going to be maybe left to individuals, as some people say that you own your career and no one else?
Yeah.
Is that going to be sort of the new mantra, if you will?
I think so. I think so, Naharaj. I think for sure there's already over a number of years been a commitment to people taking much more control, of course, of their own career, and that will include taking control of their learning and development with guidance. I think if they're going to stay in a particular organization, from people in the organization who would be able to offer them guidance as to what to do or where to do it. One of the things that we talk about a lot here at the university as well as externally is that professors and development experts in organizations are more now becoming, rather than sort of gurus, for want of a better word, they're becoming sort of curators of learning. As we all know, there is a ton of very good material that's available online, to develop, for people to develop. And one of the things I've certainly noticed from many of my Indian contacts, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is how many young Indians appear to have been taking, courses online as a consequence of the pandemic. And I think this is what's going to happen in the future in organizations. Some are already sort of curating from a whole range of information and a whole range of knowledge that's available, a collection of things that people might use or go to actually develop. And so I think the shift to more online learning is partly to do with the pandemic, but I think more importantly, it's because of the quantity of information and learning opportunities that are available online that in some ways actually shift the role of somebody within an organization who may be the learning and development professional to curating all of this information for people in their organization rather than themselves designing and delivering it for their staff.
Right. So there is one question from one of our distinguished colleagues in HR. He's a professor in HR at our MBA program, Por Singh. So the question is, how is big data playing a role in the future? Will play a role in the future of HR? And maybe I will extend that to, you also touched upon AI and specifically, I mean, in what ways will those two technologies maybe impact the future of HR personnel?
I think specifically with regard to analytics, essentially in an HR and in a broader sense, it's really about the collection of data and then the understanding of how that data might be used much more effectively to make HR decisions. So in terms of just the collection of data, first of all, which is obviously important, if I go back to the example of Rio Tinto here, which asks its staff every week to fill in a feedback survey, every week, every Friday. And that becomes a huge data set that can then be used in order to prevent or make changes to the kinds of ways how people experience the workplace. And that could be anything from their physical working location to the small problems they may have had during the course of a week at work. So what then happens there is that based on the collection of this data on a weekly basis, the organization or HR in that organization makes incremental changes, small changes all of the time to its HR practices in order to heighten the employee experience. So the collection of data and the use of analytics, of course, also enables an organization to predict what things may happen in the future, or what things appear to be occurring, or what part of the workforce appear to be becoming dissatisfied or show signs of demoralization. And on the basis of that, the organization can do things to actually try to understand better what they might do to obviously lessen the dissatisfaction, or in the worst case scenario, to prevent people that they don't want to lose from potentially leaving an organization. So I think in a whole range of ways, whether it's through machine learning, whether it's through algorithms, artificial intelligence in recruitment, more specifically, I think in the area of virtual reality, where I think there are huge opportunities for HR. The impact that across the board is already big, and in the future I think will be much greater. In theory, and I think in practice, this should ensure that HR over a period of time becomes a very different kind of function in an organization. And there's still a lot of elements, I think, of HR management in organizations that can be subjected to technology, using technology to perform, those kinds of roles.
Right. So one last question, and maybe an extension of it, which I will add. This is Rahul, by the way, talking. And so question from Captain is, many HR personnel do not seem to understand the core function of organizations and the core business. Now, is this an India-centric phenomenon? Because we very much have experienced this. I have experienced this. Is it a worldwide sort of phenomenon? And you know, clearly, what you are talking about, what you have mentioned, seems to point uh, towards HR department and people working in HR not being transactional and not enforcing policies like you mentioned, but rather actually playing a more strategic role and building people and their personalities and their careers, helping with that, which is of course a much more mature value addition. So, but the curiosity, of course, remains: is this an India-centric thing that we sometimes see HR just enforcing policies, not understanding what the company is about, or is it
Yeah.
everywhere?
Yeah, Raul. No, I don't think it is India-centric. I think it exists certainly, in the countries that I've worked in and where I've done work in, and also here in Australia. Um, the a sort of an interesting point will be, I think, when we probably stop talking about, and I think one of the reasons why some companies now don't refer to HR, of course, they call it sort of people and culture or whatever, is to try to get the language or the discourse away from that issue of just of being, HR. And the problem is, I think that a lot of people, young people that go into HR, certainly this is my experience both here and before I came to Australia when I was in Canada. Young people doing an HR degree, unfortunately, one of the reasons that they would give for actually doing it is because they don't have to do any courses that have numbers. And that I think is unfortunately a bad starting point for being in HR, because it gives the impression that, which I think is accurate, that some of these young people, don't want to do anything like accounting or finance or whatever. And I think that then just becomes sort of somehow, um, some embedded in aspects of the HR profession, where people believe that the exciting thing about HR is, new policies and so on. But in actual fact, that doesn't do, as you've indicated, I think, Raoul, the HR profession any good at all, because you cannot be a good HR person unless you're a good business person. And this is something that I've experienced in many countries. So, to go straight to the heart of your question, it isn't an India-centric thing. It's something that unfortunately exists in many parts of the world, and it doesn't do the reputation of HR people, as I'm sure you know from your own experience. It doesn't do it any good at all when people pigeonhole them and stereotype them in that way. Uh, and in many cases, they unfortunately deserve to be pigeonholed in that way, because that's what they are.
Okay, great. I think we are well over our time. So I hope that I have covered all the questions. If I have missed a question, apologize for that. Thank you so much for taking the questions patiently, and I will hand over back to Captain Nagaraj. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor McKenna. It's been an absolute privilege hearing Dr. Steve McKenna. His strategies for human resource management, trends, and outlooks are brilliant. What managers are managing is the effect of many things coming together, and hence the complexity in a post COVID world. Thank you, Professor, for in some ways simplifying the complex. And before I bid you a good night, I must thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. And and my brilliant team from Executive Education for supporting this webinar, Dr. Rahul Dige, Professor Rajan, Arvind, Malathi, and Imtiaz Mohammed. Thank you so much. And thank you once again, Professor, for being here today. And it's been wonderful listening to you.
Thank you, Professor Naharaj. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, and good night. Stay safe.
Good night and stay safe too. Thank you.
Thank you.